Hello, it's Neil Romanek, and this is episode 2 of Nothing is Written, a meandering, wayward, wandering, lost in the deserts, ongoing analysis of David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia. So I am back. I'm quite excited. I'm doing this 2 days in a row. Who would have thought? It's amazing. Anyway, I just wanted to today talk a little bit about the different versions of Lawrence of Arabia that have appeared through the years and my own experience with them. My real immersion in Lawrence of Arabia when I first experienced the movie fully. I talked a little bit yesterday about the first time I'd seen it. But when I really first saw it and got it, and it really transformed me, was seeing it in 1989. In 1989, there was a release of a restored version of the film. It was the first time that all the elements of the film had finally been brought together the way they had originally intended, the way a director David Lean had originally intended them to be. The film had been cut after its original release. About 20 minutes had been cut out to make it a bit more appealing to cinema owners. It's a very, very long movie, and 20 minutes out of the full nearly 4 hours of the movie wasn't much, but it helped a bit. Then more was cut out for the television release in the early 1970s. And a lot of those pieces were, lost, really. It wasn't even known if a lot of that missing footage, the original negatives, even existed. So in 1989, there was a restoration done with David Lean's cooperation, and a lot of those missing scenes were found, put back together. Some dialogue had to be reconstructed with some of the actors who were still alive, and in some cases, the actors who were dead, their voices were supplied by other people. The restoration was done by Robert Harris and Jim Peyton, who were responsible for a few of the great restorations of that time. Robert Harris was also involved in the restoration of Spartacus, just about the same time, actually, about 1991. My Fair Lady, Vertigo, Rear Window, and we owe him a debt of gratitude, Robert A. Harris. But so this restoration was done. David Lean was involved. David Lean was even recutting some of the scenes. He was trimming stuff. He took stuff out. It was like he had been given another chance to recut the movie to a certain extent. And that film, that re-release in 1989, I saw in Century City at the I think it's the Century Plaza Cinema. I can't quite remember. But it's the big giant cinema they had in Century City. I still assume it's there. It's been a long time since I've been to Century City or back to Los Angeles for that matter. And I saw it with my mom and dad who had been visiting. And you remember me talking yesterday about my dad seeing Lawrence of Arabia, it having such an impact on him. And kind of through the impact it had on him, it had a big impact on me as a kid, even though I hadn't really fully experienced the film. So we saw it. I was blown away. And my life changed. I really actually had a sense of what movies could do in a way that I hadn't before. I've only had a few movie experiences like that in the past. Well, I mean, quite a few of those movie experiences, really, where you see something and it's a revelation. But this was one of those turning points. It looked amazing. Visually it was stunning. But, I remember at the interval, the intermission, my dad turned to me and said, "It is not perfect," about the restoration, because he had seen it in the original release. And he talked to me later and he said, well, what he saw is in that 1989 release of the film that it looked a little brown. It looked a little ruddy, a little reddish. That the sand looked kind of dirty, more like dirt. And that in the original release that he had seen when it first came out, there was a sense of the sand being more gold. There was a goldness to things, which thematically, of course, works much better. Obviously, the desert is gold; it is treasure, and Lawrence is himself gold. And the idea of this being kind of a land of gold, and gold comes up as a theme again and again and again, is kind of obvious. You know, that of course it should be gold, the sand. And the fact that the reds and the warmer colors have been brought out a bit more, it's a very subtle thing. My dad's a painter, and so this popped out immediately to him. And in other versions I've seen of Lawrence of Arabia, I can kind of see it. I'm like, oh, yeah, a little reddish. So anyway, he didn't think it was a perfect restoration, but it was pretty impressive. As for me, I was amazed. I kept coming back again and again and again. We'd be hanging out on a Friday night. It was like, well, what you do? Well, let's go see Lawrence of Arabia again. It's still out there. So we'd go and see it over and over and over. We went to see it in Century City. And I would, I'd continue to go see it whenever it was available. If there was a screening somewhere of Lawrence of Arabia, I'd try to get out and see it. I saw it once at the New Beverly Cinema a few years after that. I think it was a 35 millimeter print. It was torn to pieces. It was in horrible shape. This was the New Beverly Cinema in the early 90s, which was not the most comfortable place or the most kept up cinema. But it was still great seeing it projected, even in those conditions. After that, that was the time that Laserdiscs came out. Laserdiscs were the ultimate format after, VHS, then Laserdisc came out. You're able to see movies on Laserdisc in ways you hadn't seen them before. Really, really looked great. The special presentations that the Criterion Collection would do. And there were a couple Lawrences that were done for Laserdisc, which were fine. Color was pretty good. Images were fairly crisp. But then the DVDs came out. And the DVDs were from those original, those masters. And again, perfectly fine. But the next sort of big iteration of the restoration of Lawrence was the 2010 Sony 4K restoration. So in I guess it was the 50th anniversary of the movie, Sony decided, we're going to do a 4K restoration. We'll do a scan of the original negatives. I think it was a scan done at 8K. That's 8K resolution of the original 65 millimeter negative. Of course, there's a lot of information on that 65 millimeter frame. And there was a new version done, a 4K version. And Sony is, of course, they want to push their 4K technology. They want to sell you 4K TVs, and they love their 4K cameras. And the 4K itself, there was a mania for 4K and for these higher resolutions, kind of starting about that period, 2010, 2012, kind of around in there. And a number of restorations were done for these 4K restorations, these kind of high-end, high-resolution restorations. And I finally saw, not too long ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, finally saw that 4K Lawrence of Arabia at the BFI. And not impressed. You may have seen the 4K restoration, and it is, the colors are brilliant, the images are really crisp, and it's all a little too much. And it feels like it was a restoration done by engineers and not filmmakers. Every little detail you're looking at it, you're like, it's almost hallucinatory, where you're watching this movie and instead of being immersed in the story and being swept away by this image in front of you, you are actually instead kind of looking at the costumes. You're kind of looking at a prop in the back, or you're looking at sand and the stones, because everything is so crystal clear that you don't know where to look. You don't know actually what to look at. And it is a bit of an effect of, rather than looking at an image, like you'd look at a painting or look at a photograph, you're kind of looking through a window onto a scene. And there's something, I think, and this is the difference maybe between engineers and filmmakers, that greater resolution, more clarity, that sense of really looking through a window at a scene is not necessarily the highest goal in filmmaking or in creating an image. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a very well-known cinematographer No, I won't name drop, but very, very award-winning cinematographer, and he was saying, that he first of all, he was unimpressed with 4K and high resolution imagery generally, or that pursuit, that kind of quest to have higher resolution, better resolution, more pixels. He was not impressed. And also he pointed out, what the great cinematographers have always done, he said, is that as soon as they get the camera, they put some diffusion on the lens. Always. Stick some diffusion on that lens, because you don't want that sort of naked, clinical gathering of information. A camera is not something to gather information, unless you're an engineer and you believe that a camera is there to gather information. A camera is something that to create an image, not just to gather the information of reality. It's a tool for creating an image. So I felt a little bit vindicated as well, because he was like, yep, absolutely, 4K, high resolutions, very suspicious of them. Of course, they're marvelous tools, because, the ability to work at that level of resolution is really, really important. But the high resolutions are not the end goal. It's like having a canvas. You want to have, the best canvas you can, but the important thing is what you paint on there. You have the sense, and to a certain extent with some of these restorations that have been done, and this kind of, again, this obsession with resolution, that, that they would look at an impressionist painting. Some of the guys who've done these restorations look at an impressionist painting and go, that's a little blurry. Let's see if we can sharpen that up. You can't even see what's going on there. It's just all a colorful blur. Sharpen that up so we can see what's happening. So, so not impressed with the digital restoration. Kind of a gorgeous, beautiful, but ultimately hollow, tinny, again, kind of speedy. I keep coming back to the meth addict version of restoration. A lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people think it's great, but it just lacks a certain magic that film has, for one, generally, and certainly the versions of Lawrence that I've seen before have had, where you are looking at an image rather than kind of trying to look through a window at something. These are kind of maybe sort of esoteric ideas, but I think cinematographers might appreciate them, and they're definitely things that I get quite obsessed about. So anyway, there is now the new print that is being shown at the Prince Charles Cinema in London, and that is being shown all this month. I'm going to try to see it next week, and I'll give you the full, my full opinion on it as soon as I see that. Interestingly, the executive VP of restoration at Sony, who was responsible for the 2010 digital restoration of Lawrence, his name was Grover Crisp, which maybe that accounts for the crispness of the image, because it is a very crispy Lawrence. It's a little too crispy for me. Anyway, so that's what I've got on all that. So I'm going to go and see the Prince Charles Cinema print. I don't know if that's going to be, I assume it will have the original that will have been struck from will be something that it'll have been generated from that 4K digital restoration. But we'll see how it goes. Another thing to remember is, when people shot film in the past, you shot film knowing this is going to have to go through all these processes. We're going to shoot it, with the gear we've got, but there are going to have to be prints struck from that. And then those prints are going to end up being flown all around the country in different cinemas with different lamps in them, different types of projection. Most of it is going to be inferior and not that great. Maybe the sound isn't going to be great in some of these places. And good filmmakers will have had that in mind. So they'll have known, okay, if I shoot this, by the time it actually gets to the viewer, or by the time we strike a print, the final image that's going to result will be this. And so the idea that you would have something struck from the original negative, and that you would have, an image that looks as good as the original negative is great in certain cases. But in others, it's a bit... some filmmakers will have thought, that's like getting the cake out of the oven before it's fully baked. Not in every case, but there is a certain amount of planning ahead that a director will have done, knowing, okay, if I shoot this, by the time it gets down the line and gets projected into cinema, it will have the certain effect to it. So there's something about going back to the original negative and trying to get something as close to the original negative as possible that potentially undermines the director's intentions. And in certain cinema, if we're talking about classic cinema in the 20th century. Okay, so that's enough for me now. Thank you so much for listening. Send me your comments, send me your thoughts. You can email me at nromanek@au-works.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much. Bye.